5, dispatch. Pockets of fire all around.
Dear Chief, much has happened since we last spoke. Welcome to Dear Chief Podcast, where your hosts and their guests share the 411 of being married to the people who respond to 911s. Take a peek into fire family life and get unabashed advice on how to prevent forest fires in your marriage. Now, here's your hosts, two seasoned fire wives, Audra and Chelsea.
Today we're talking about compassion fatigue with Dr. Michele Finneran. Welcome to the show, Doctor.
Thank you so much for having me, Chelsea. I appreciate it.
Dr. Michele Finneran is a licensed professional counselor located in Florida. She's an author and mental health advocate, owns and operates her own private counseling practice, and has a PhD in conflict resolution and dispute analysis. Dr. Finneran thoroughly enjoys helping others both personally and professionally.
Thank you. Yes, that's true.
We brought you on today because you are doing a research study on compassion fatigue during COVID. And this is a huge topic we've talked about times on the show already. So we want to learn about what it is and hear more about the study today. Give us a brief definition of compassion fatigue.
Compassion fatigue was a term coined back in the day by a nurse, but was really thoroughly defined by Charles Figley, who is a psychologist in the field, which is definition for professional caregivers and personal caregivers for the cost of caring. It's somewhat related to burnout, but it's another level of burnout that's a little bit higher because it has to do with your profession. When you have a profession that you care for others, like a firefighter, like a law enforcement officer, like a mental health counselor, even today, like teachers, you often get zapped by other people's energy and what they're dealing with. And the caregivers that I worked with, particularly I work with a lot of first responders throughout, have been absolutely zapped and during COVID. And my goal was to make sure primarily that their basic needs were getting met. They're eating, they're sleeping, they are taking care of themselves, they're resting. And that was kind of like the height of COVID, is making sure their basic needs are getting met. And they're able to take care of the people that they're servicing, which was challenging because there was a lot of people that were in need during that time. And my first responders were also very much in need. So it's the cost of caring. It's the cost of being a caregiver. Professionally, the study is more for professionals, like the professions I identified. And it's seeing how caregivers have effectively coped, maladaptively or ineffectively, which is like negatively, or positively coped with the stresses of caregiving and their level of compassion fatigue during this time.
Compassion fatigue is a big deal, I think, across the board. I feel like anybody who was still working out of the home during COVID has experienced some kind of compassion fatigue, or maybe every human, honestly. I think probably everyone.
I don't have children. So people with children that were working from home while their kids were going to school, I just don't know how the people got through that. And I was trying to help them get through that. It was very, very hard for them. And rightfully so. It was very challenging.
What do you think happened during COVID really to kind of accelerate the compassion fatigue?
I think the COVID situation was very challenging in itself because we are typically by nature more social creatures. We were forced not to be social. And that really just did people in, just not having that interaction, not having that support. The rates of suicide absolutely went up during this time. The rate of substance abuse absolutely went up in this time. And the rate of domestic violence went up increasingly during this time. And now with the aftermath of it, I'm seeing a lot of marriages needing a lot of help and a lot of families needing a lot of help. The aftermath of COVID, that isolation and that, alienation from loved ones and people getting really, really sick and actually dying from COVID was absolutely mortifying for our nation.
Tell me about workplace burnout versus compassion fatigue, because it seems like they go hand in hand, I think. So talk to us a little bit, especially for our first responders. Talk to us about that.
Burnout is when you become more like you're teetering on apathy. like not caring as much and not really having the compassion that you need. But compassion fatigue is a different level because you're actually forced to have compassion as a caregiver. So it's a little bit more of a harder situation. That they resemble the same, but it's not the same because of the provider's profession and what they're trying to do. They have to have compassion. As a law enforcement officer, as a firefighter, as a nurse, as a teacher, as an educator, as a mental health profession, you're a first responder. You are made to have compassion. You're professionally. So it's a harder cost versus burnout with somebody that's need to interact or care for the public the way service providers do and first responders do. The ramifications are very much similar, physical, mental health wise and psychologically, but because first responders and service providers are forced to have compassion, it makes it so much more challenging to have compassion when you are on the verge of burnout. So physical symptoms such as feeling like you have like migraines and nausea and digestive issues and fatigue and just energy zapped, overeating, undersleeping, oversleeping. I mean, these are all just like basic care. People's basic care were getting shot. And I was, as a therapist in the mental health field, being in the mental health field for 25 years. I started at a very young age in private practice for 12 years. I have never in my life for these past 3 years seen the level of mental health disparity of which I've seen during this time. As a mental health professional and a person who also suffered from compassion fatigue during this time, it was alarming for me as somebody who's on both sides of the spectrum.
So now we're in this place where we have a ton of first responders, mental health people really dealing with this compassion fatigue. I know nurses have it, police officers, first responders, everywhere, teachers have it. What do we do now to combat it?
I mean, mental health has really taken a root in people's focal point right now. I mean, it should have always been. Back in the 80s, it was very much stigmatized, very much looked upon and frowned upon as someone being labeled as crazy or having serious issues if they went to a psychiatrist or a mental health provider. Never should have been the case back in the 80s. Becoming more accepted and gravitated to in this day and age. It's becoming at the forefront of our self-care is our mental health care. If you don't have effective mental health care, you can't really have any kind of care. You can't work. You can't take care of yourself physically. You can't take care of your family. You're not functioning mental health wise. So now mental health has taken a forefront as it always should have been, but now needs to be more so now than ever. And for people that still feel that mental health is a stigmatized issue, they're the ones who are having the issues because they don't really see the importance of how mental health is in our society in today's day and age.
So what do we do now? How do we undo kind of the effects of COVID and compassion fatigue in the workplace?
We talk about it. You start destigmatizing it. You got to start communicating about it. You got to start really focusing in on that this is an issue and not trying to disguise it as not an issue or a problem. We really start to try focusing in on having those conversations, talking to your EAP, your employee assistance programs, talking to people, your supervisors, talking to your peers. I mean, this is something that should not be swept under the rug because when something like this continuously gets swept under the rug, you're going to have a bigger issue and it's going to resurface its ugly head in bigger ways. So start bridging those conversations. Start having it be more socially acceptable in your workplace. Make it part of an EAP training, an employee assistance program training. Make it a part of it. Law enforcement and firefighters are doing peer-to-peer. They're doing miraculous jobs of keeping themselves healthy and informed. They are spearheading this compassion fatigue head on. And some cities and some municipalities are more progressive than others. And those that are not need to get on board. They really do. They really need to find out what other cities are doing, what other government agencies are doing to really take care of their first responders because they're the ones who suffer the most. Having candid conversations and peer-to-peer support and bureaucracies that understand how effective mental health training and education is in law enforcement, firefighters, nurses, not disguising it, addressing it early on.
Yeah, I think it's amazing to me the amount of departments probably around the country. I mean, just specifically in my county alone, that don't even have a peer program.
Yeah.
And they're still trying to start one. I mean, I don't understand why this wasn't a priority in the middle of COVID to get these peer programs enacted. For the departments that don't have a peer program, where do they even start? Like, where would you recommend?
I would start talking to municipalities that are more progressive. Get educated by learning from your fellow cities. What are they doing? How are they protecting and keeping their first responders safe? What's the integration process? Start communicating and collaborating. That one of the things that I feel like, a lot of nurses and doctors and other doctors don't do. Doctors to doctors do not collaborate with each other medically. That's a problem. When you have a patient that has a myriad of issues, there's no collaboration between doctors. And same thing with cities. I mean, I know it's competitive, but we have to really take care of each other as a community. And cities have a responsibility to take care of their first responders. And that collaboration with other cities that are a little bit more progressive, that have a little bit more of a handle on the scope and severity of things, need to be reached out to and be communicated to by cities that aren't really grasping the severity of the issue and not really coming to terms with what we're dealing with. This is a beast. This is a beast that cannot be ignored and should never have been ignored.
I want to take it back for a second because we actually have a plethora of people in our department who have teens who are starting to self-mutilate and talking about suicide. And a lot of times we hear, well, that's just the fallout of the pandemic. But is it really?
No.
And what would you say to those people that are having those issues in their homes?
I think my teens and my teachers, and especially my teachers that had teens during this time, were probably affected the most. When someone is self-mutilating or talking even having passive suicide thoughts, don't ignore it. Don't think it's a call for attention. Jump on it as a parent. Get the professional help that's needed. Right now, it's very hard to try to find a mental health therapist who have openings. Call a myriad of people on your insurance plan. Call people who know people. Don't give up on finding the help that necessitates for your teen to be safe, because they have been affected. Teens now trying to learn to socialize and keep up a conversation and just have basic communication is becoming more and more problematic than ever, just because their isolated state that they've been in during COVID. So it's a severe issue that parents need to take seriously. And even just signs, if you're seeing your teen maybe not communicating, not saying anything, staying stuck in their room, not integrating with the family, that's a problem. Have the conversations. Parents need to start having conversations so they see differences in their children's behavior and their teens' behavior. Address it. Don't sweep any of this under the rug. I mean, early detection is key, but parents have got to be aware of their teens and their children's mental state.
Yeah. And especially I think for us, for first responders and their families, it's hard for us to wrap our head around our kids having those issues and how to deal with them. Because I know for me, for my firefighter, it's one thing to handle that stuff when you're on duty, but it's a whole nother situation when you're at home having to deal with it. So you've got some videos on YouTube. I watched a couple of them last night. They're pretty cool. Tell us about them. What's your goals with the YouTube channel?
The goals with the YouTube channel is just to spread education, is to educate, because this is where when people don't have a therapist or can't have access to a therapist, platforms like this, what you guys are doing, YouTube channels like what I'm doing, are educational and resources for people that can't find a therapist, don't have access to therapy, don't have funding for therapy. They educate themselves. So it's an educational platform that I have going on, as you have your platform going on, where people turn to get the help and the advice or the recommendations that they need. It's beautiful. And the study is getting done. So it's a long study. It's an integrative study. And I'm at the stages where I collected all my data. I've collected about 400 surveys from first responders. And that's a beast in itself to kind of analyze and decode. So the goal really is I need some assistance assistance in doing so. And I don't know the results of those yet. So I'm trying to find some help in like a research assistance at universities to kind of help me process and analyze the data. The goal really of the YouTube channel and platforms like your platform has got going on is to educate and provide resources for people that don't have otherwise.
Awesome.
Thank you for having me on your show. I think it's very important. This platform is very important. I think you guys are doing an amazing job and very educational.
Thank you. So nice.
It's time for the hot seat. The hot seat is a series of questions to get to know you better. So just answer with the first thing that comes to mind. First question, what's your coffee order?
Cuban coffee, espresso.
Coffee espresso. That's a lot of caffeine.
That's a lot of
Is
caffeine.
this a Florida thing?
No, it's a Michele thing. I can't really complete a sentence without a strong cup of coffee or two, but I can only do one Cuban coffee because if I do more than that, I will be bouncing off a wall. So I have to know my limits, but that I don't get it a lot. When I do get it, I feel like absolutely amazing.
Well, you're in Florida, so you have better access to it than we do.
Yeah. We have some good coffee down here.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. What does the word leader mean to you?
Someone who does not care what other people think, but also take in consideration what other people think. That's what I feel like a leader is.
I love that.
If you could say anything to a fire chief or a police chief, what would you say?
Be safe for you, for your family. Be safe. Be safe out there. Anytime I have a detective that has to cancel or a firefighter that has to cancel last minute, I tell them we can reschedule. Just be safe out there.
How do you spend your free time?
Not a whole lot of it. So when I do, I surround myself with people I love, that I care about. That's very important to me. I go every morning. I go for a morning walk every morning for an hour and a half for my own self-care and my own mental health, alone time to process, to meditate. I do it on the weekend. I get the best work done on those walks. I think about all kinds of things that come to mind. I pray on those walks. I really don't talk to anybody. I really am more within. I go on these walks for within. And I do it really early in the morning so it's dark. I do it in my neighborhood so it's safe, but there's no one around. Moon is out and I don't care what I look like. I just walk for my own mental health. It's the best. It's the best.
Yep. Audra and I have a pretty good practice of walking too. So we hear you there.
I also have a friend that just started getting into it, which has been amazing to me. I have a friend that I used to work with at Broward Sheriff's Office that she does yoga. She's a yoga instructor and I take her classes and man, the next day I can barely get out of bed. It's the best. It's the best. I love it.
I'm not a yoga person because I'd be the person sitting in the back of the room screaming because I don't do quiet. But and I'll just over here cracking up. But I have an appreciation for it for sure.
Yeah, I have a lot of arthritis. I'm super arthritic, so it does help me get up and down my stairs safely. Without my mobility falling out on me.
So you can do rage yoga. That would be fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think we've had somebody tell me that before.
Yeah.
My modality is music. I don't know. It wasn't Ashley Iverson that told me that I should do the drums or something.
I think so, actually.
Yeah. Okay. Last question. What are you currently reading?
I'm trying to get through. I haven't had a whole lot. It's try to spend at least a half an hour of reading on Sundays. It's called The Power of Discipline by Danielle Walter. Power of Discipline. It's a very short read. It's very, very good. Very interesting. It's a yellow and black hard copy book. Pretty interesting.
Okay. Who's the author again?
Danielle Walter.
Definitely, that'll be in the show notes for anybody that's interested.
All right. Well, Dr. Finneran, thank you so much for coming on the show and chatting with us today. If you want to learn more about Dr. Finneran and the results of the survey, you can check out our website, beckandassociates.com. She's also on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. We'll put all of her info in the show notes for you. If you want to hear more from us, you subscribe to our podcast on any platform you listen to. Subscribe to our website, dearchiefs.com. We're also on TikTok and LinkedIn now too. We're fancy. You can search Dear Chiefs on social media and find us and watch our funny reels and listen to our awesome podcast with hosts like Dr. Finneran. So thank you for coming on today.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
We appreciate you.
Thanks so much for tuning in. Find us on social media at Dear Chiefs Podcast and online at dearchiefs.com. Tune in weekly for the 25,000-foot view of loving a first responder. Audra and Chelsea, over and out.